Welcome to Slablog Podcast, episode 22, I believe it is. I'm your host, Philip Albritton, and we have a phone-in guest this morning. Is my friend from Virginia, Mark Cooperstein. Should be calling in here any second now. Oh, okay. I think that's him. Hang on. Hello?
Phil, this is Mark. How are you?
Oh, hey, Mark. Yeah, I figured that was you calling. Let me adjust my gain here on your input. Yeah, I'm glad you called.
The first time I've ever used this phone, and because all I ever use at my house is my cell phone. And this is our landline phone, which came with a package, with the internet and everything else. And I'm noticing it's kind of noisy, but...
Oh, really? Well,
I don't know. You may not hear it on your end, but
no, I'm not hearing anything. I'm hearing your voice loud and clear, and I can boost the volume on it later on, on your track. But for those listeners that, for the benefit of my listeners, this is Mark Cooperstein, a friend of mine from, although he sounds like a Yankee, he's a Virginian. He comes from Virginia. Or not comes from there, but originally, I don't think, but he's been living in Virginia for quite a long time. And I know Mark from the association we've had on that R75R forum, like several other guests that I've had on the show. I think that's where we met. Isn't that true, Mark?
Yes, it is. I think we first met at what we called the Big Stir Bash, Big Stir being the nickname moniker we gave to our bikes.
Yeah.
But they look kind of beaky. And but then after that, every year and still going on, we would meet at Hungry Mother Park in Virginia.
Yep.
And that's where I really got to know you. That one year you came with your son and I came with my son.
That's right. I remember that. And I got home with him. His name was Christopher. I got home with him and delivered him back to his mom. And he was so mad. He said, all those guys want to do when they go there is sit up late at night and drink whiskey.
That's funny because that's exactly what I told my friends the one and only year that my father took me to his hunting lodge in upstate New York.
Yeah.
I said, oh, they don't want to hunt. They just want to sit around drinking whiskey and playing poker.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well,
we did a lot of good riding on those weekends. I mean, the mountains up there are phenomenal. And, I did that for every year except for the last, I guess, 4 or so.
Yeah.
Since I've sold my bike.
Yeah, I noticed the last few years you were coming, you had a walking stick with you, and your knees getting worse and worse, or something there.
Yeah, I got operations, everything, new hips, new knees. I'm good as gold, but
oh, great.
She who must be ordained that my riding days are over.
Yeah, I was going to get into that. You don't have the 1150R anymore, I guess.
No, I dream about it. I have it in my dreams, but sadly, it got to a point where I couldn't get my leg up over the saddle because of my hip.
Uh-huh.
So I went and sold it, and then I had a hip replacement, which was the easiest operation I've ever had. I was good to go in like 6 weeks. And now I have no problems with my hip. I could easily ride a motorcycle, but alas and alack,
yeah,
it's gone.
Well, what about something like smaller and less dangerous, like just a small moped or a scooter or something to ride around town?
Bite your tongue. Now, smaller, I'm thinking more like a 6 or 700cc Honda. They have some really, really nice bikes in that range.
Right.
But, as I said, my wife she's against it, so.
Well, yeah,
Of course, she was against me getting my bike originally. You know, she knew I liked motorcycles when we got married. And she said, well, okay, when our kids are all grown up, you can have a motorcycle.
Right. And
actually, I did the math back in, I guess it was 2001. When they bought my R1150R BMW, I figured that if I waited to satisfy that, I'd be 70 years old. So without her knowing it, I went down and bought a new BMW.
Oh, boy.
Of course, she actually enjoyed it after getting mad at me. Then she liked it so much that I taught her how to ride on my bike.
Oh.
And
you mean as a pillion or to drive it?
To drive it.
Oh, okay.
And so subsequently, she went out and bought her own.
Oh, wow.
A little 700cc Yamaha.
Uh-huh.
And no, she wouldn't. She rode with me on the a pillion on the back for maybe 2 or 3 times and hated it. She has to be in control. She's a doctor, you know. She's one of those.
Yeah.
And she has to be the boss. So.
Well, I'm the same way. I could never ride on the back. The times I've had to ride on the back, it just felt terrible, you know. But I know exactly what she means. Yeah. So you're without a bike right now, and you're in good health. So I understand you're involved in videography and computer stuff. You always been a computer guy. From what I remember.
Yeah, that was my career. Was pretty much writing computer software and working in different laboratories to automate the laboratories. And I did that until my wife went back to school to get her medical degree, and then we switched places. I worked out of the house. She worked in a clinic in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, which is where we live now.
Well, didn't you have an interlude there for at one time where you got a nursing degree? Weren't you a nurse at one time?
That's exactly right. I got bored, so we homeschooled all of our kids, and we always told them, you know, if you guys ever want to go to a public schools, by all means, you know, we're not stopping you. So they all stayed homeschooling until late junior high and high school. And then they all ended up at the local high school.
Yeah.
So I found myself having nothing to do. And so I went back to school and got a BSN in nursing and did that for a while. There was no or very little opportunity in this area, which is fairly remote, to do any software development and any software engineering. So it seemed like something that I might enjoy doing, since my wife was a physician. Mm-hmm. Turned out it was the worst mistake of my life. I love computers. I can sit and talk to them all day long, write some beautiful code, but it's not that I'm not a people's person. I am, but being a nurse is one of the hardest professions, especially if you work in a hospital. You're working 12-hour shifts. You're on your feet all the time.
Yeah.
And I was already in my 50s when I went back and did that. So,
right.
You know, was already started to have physical problems then. So it didn't last very long.
That sounds like about the same time I changed careers and became a elementary school art teacher.
Yeah.
I just switched tracks and did that for about 13 years before I retired.
What did you do before that?
I was in retail picture framing, managing shops. I never had my own shop, but I did hands-on work, picture framing, building, mat making, you name it, I did it all. And then I managed a couple of shops in Atlanta for a few years.
Cool. Yeah. Very cool.
I really enjoyed that. There wasn't much money in it at all, but I enjoyed it so much, I just kept doing it. I just kept going until I got my teaching degree. Yeah. Well,
I miss my motorcycle. I have to getting back to that. I really do. And I
Well,
keep thinking, right now she's saying, well, you've got the money, so I'm sort of waiting for somebody to die and leave me a bunch of money. Say, I've got the money. See what other excuse she comes up with.
yeah. Well, obviously you have ridden quite a bit in the past. Now,
Oh, yeah.
I've heard about this story that you've told to our group at 1150R at one point, or on Facebook or somewhere. I remember this photo of you standing with an old BMW motorcycle, and there's a story that goes along with that. Can we get a little?
Yeah. Well, so BMW motorcycles is all I've ever known. And the way I came into it, I was 20 years old, living with a bunch of people in this community. You know, we had about 3 or 4 houses that were all blocked off in this area. It used to be a summer retreat from New York City. We were about an hour and a half north of the city.
Uh-huh.
And so it was all friends and freaks and that sort of thing. You know, a lot of us worked at this, driving school buses. And I had a friend, Eddie Mullinette, but everybody affectionately, he was known as Dirty Eddie.
Dirty Eddie.
And Dirty Eddie he'd always had motorcycles. And BMW had a big change in design in the early 70s, where they, previous to that, all of their bikes were like World War II looking German, you know, big, heavy Zoftig.
Right.
Not really sporty. And then they came out with the R series in the early 70s. Which were really nice bikes for the time. They were 2-cylinder, horizontally opposed, air-cooled, and they were fast. They had a 600, a 750, and then they came out with a 900, which a lot of people turned into cafe racers.
Those are known as the airheads, right?
Those were known as the airheads, exactly. Yeah. And basically because everything was by air. The oil cooling, the cylinders were all cooled. Mm-hmm. There were no fluids to cool it. So my friend Dirty Eddie, who had one of those bikes, bought it new and had it for a year, came up to me one winter and said, "Hey, why don't we all why don't you go get a motorcycle and we'll ride cross country and have a lot of fun next summer?" So, you know, being the crazy person I was, I said, sure. Well, I'd never been on a motorcycle, never driven one, never even ridden on one.
But you knew how to ride a bicycle and that kind of thing.
Right? Of course, yeah. I thought it was a great idea, driving a school bus at that time. So that was the winter, and I had some money in the bank, and I bought a used BMW 750 Toaster, is what they used to call it, the R750, and had shiny aluminum panels on the gas tank on each side of it, was why they call it a toaster. So that winter, I bought the bike. I learned how to drive it, took my road test in New York State, which in the middle of the winter with a snowmobile suit on. It was so cold. And I think the instructor that, you know, he was in a car telling me all these things to do and everything. And I think he passed me just because he thought I was just anyone crazy enough to want to get their license in temperature like this. Must really want it. And I did. So I got my license. Then, of course, and I spent the rest of the spring just perfecting, learning how to ride. Then that summer we left. There were 3 of us, and we did a cross country trek Ultimately, it was 13,000 miles we did in that one summer.
You just went across the middle section, straight across out to the west?
No, actually, we started in upstate New York and we went south.
Uh-huh.
So we really had not a whole lot of plans specifically about where we wanted to go. We had about 3 or 4 different friends along the way, and we were going to stop there for a day or two. But beyond that, Dirty Eddie, so it was Dirty Eddie and Mark, myself, and this young lady named Vanessa.
Uh-huh.
Dirty Eddie and myself had 750s. Vanessa had a 600cc BMW.
Yeah.
And this was 1972, so it was a long time ago. And we set off. We went south because the first stop was going to be in South Carolina. We were going to stay with a friend of Dirty Eddie's. Her name was Brenda. I had never met her or anything, but they were nice enough people. And so we went south. First day out, we got stopped in Virginia, in Bowling Green, Virginia, for doing speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour on the very first day out. We had been obeying the law. It was a beautiful day, and we were in Virginia. We knew we had less than a couple hours before we got to Brenda's in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And we were on this secondary highway. It was not an interstate. We stayed off of interstates absolutely whenever we could. We never hated interstates.
Right.
So it was a divided highway. There was no traffic. We came upon this stretch of road where it went down for maybe 3/4 of a mile and then up for another half mile. And it was just, a beautiful piece of road, no traffic that we could see. I noticed, so our riding formation was Dirty Eddie, then Vanessa, then myself.
Yeah.
So I noticed, first thing I noticed is Dirty Eddie lays down on his tank and takes off. And then I see Vanessa laying down in her tank. And I said, well, what the heck? So I did the same thing. We went down that beautiful hill and came up. And then, and I know we were going faster than 100 miles an hour because I remember laying on my tank and looking at the speedo. But I noticed that Dirty Eddie sat up real quick. And I thought, man, that's not safe. You're going 100 miles an hour, you don't sit up. And the next thing I see, Vanessa sits up real quick and hits the brake. I said, well, what's going on? So I slowed down and I hit the brake, and I sat up. And when I did that, I saw the lights in my mirror. And evidently there was a sheriff going in the other direction. And as I said, it was a divided highway, so we didn't notice him. And
he just made a U-turn.
Whipped down the road and turned around and had his lights flashing, which you couldn't see when we were laying down in the tank.
Uh-huh.
So that was a real bummer for the first day out. It took us to the judge because at that time there was no reciprocity between states, and we were all from New York with New York licenses.
Boys, you're in a heap of trouble now.
Yeah. All they wanted was our money. Took us to a judge, and it was $1 for every mile up to 100 miles. So that was $100 plus a $20 court fee. So back then, we didn't have very much money to begin with on this trip. We had planned on spending as much of it as possible in our tents, and because we just didn't have money to go in. We didn't really want to go into motels and things.
That's what I was going to ask next. Were you camping or moteling or what?
Yeah. So we paid the ticket. Judge said goodbye, slow down. we went to Brenda's. So essentially, we went south. Then we started going west, southwest, because ultimately the next stop was Arizona at our friends that lived in Bisbee.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed there. So
well, that's a long ways from South Carolina.
Yeah, well, I mean, it took us a while. It took us a couple of days, and we stayed in national forest campgrounds whenever we could. They were the best. They were real inexpensive. A few dollars, you stick your money in an envelope put it on a tree somewhere, and that was how we lived. We ate out all the time. We never cooked anything. We always, and that was part of the joy of that trip, was just seeing all the different kinds of restaurants and places around the country. They were so different.
Had you ever been out west before that?
Actually, yeah. In 1970, 2 years before that, I went out to San Francisco.
In a car?
In a 1961 Chevrolet Impala.
Oh, okay.
With three other friends and a little dog named Lobo.
Yeah. You got to carry a little dog along.
Yep, in a 61 Chevrolet. So I had already been out 2 years before that.
Yeah. Well, but the motorcycle trip, we talk about this on just about every one of the podcasts. People I talk to, the thrill of riding a motorcycle is, it's not something you can explain very easily to people who don't ride.
It's indescribable. I never would have thought, Phil, that it would have been a hobby that I really would have grown so attached to. And actually, I feel like I was pretty proficient a rider. I could really handle that bike in the twisties, and I was a safe driver. We all of us from that group, the R1150R website group, collectively did all of the driver safety motorcycle MSF courses, the advanced.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just something I never would have seen that I would have really enjoyed.
So after you
really did,
after you made it to Arizona and stopped off at your friend's house there, did you kept going west, or did you?
We ultimately did, but from Bisbee. And the cool thing I remember about Bisbee was every summer they would have these races. So this Bisbee is like in a little valley, and there's mountains on either side going into the town. And all these kids would build these, oh Lord, I don't even know what, go-karts or,
Yeah.
And they would have this race down the mountain, which would terminate in the middle of town. They put up a bunch of bales of hay for them to crash into, and everybody just sit there drinking beer and watching these kids racing their go-karts. A lot of them were homemade. Almost all of them were homemade.
Were they motorized?
And no. They were not motorized.
Oh.
It didn't need to be, because they were coming down these huge
Just
hills.
coasting down the hill, yeah.
Coasting down the hills. And I'm sure they still do it. I would hope they still do it. So while we were there, we went into Mexico and have lunch, and then came back the same day just to say that we had been in Mexico. And then from Bisbee, we went north into Colorado and into the Rockies before heading ultimately west to San Francisco.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And we did not go to L.A. I remember Dirty Eddie saying that he'd rather shoot heroin than going to Los Angeles. So we stayed as far away from that part, from Southern California. And we had friends in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So we stayed there for a couple of days and just really enjoyed being put up. Before San Francisco, we were stopped at Las Vegas. And there was absolutely no place. Now, I'm sure it's changed now, but there was no campgrounds where you could set up a tent. And I was the only one back then that had one of these new self-supporting tents.
Yeah.
Everybody else, Vanessa and Dirty Eddie had these ones that had to be staked.
Right.
And there was no place to stake them in. The campground, the KOA we stayed at was just a paved parking lot, basically. So they were miserable. They basically had to crawl into a tent that was, not supported. So we were glad to get out of Las Vegas, and then we drove through Death Valley going to California, and that was hot.
Well, how did the bikes perform? Did you have to stop and do things to them, or?
No, they were flawless. The only big maintenance we did was tires, because what would you say? You get about 5,000 miles on a front tire.
Going across country like that, the back tire would wear out first. Yeah. Yeah,
that's right. Especially with the luggage we had. So several times we would stop and get new tires.
Yeah.
We had to get clutch cables, as I recall. They wore out, especially when we got to San Francisco, because all those hills going, in that city is not good on a bike. So we ended up, all of us had to replace clutch cables, but that was pretty much it.
Yeah, that was prior. I think that was prior to the technology of plastic-coated cables like they have now.
Yeah, that is correct. And as I recall, we actually brought extra cables. It was part of our what we packed with our gear. And my gear on the back of my bike was basically my sleeping bag, which I still have. It was the really good military grade. It was what at that time the Army was recommending, and it was made out of the synthetic stuff called Polar Guard, which is not especially light, but it has as good insulating qualities as down. But if it gets wet, it dries much quicker than down does.
Yeah.
So I had one of those. I still have it. We had our tents, a couple of change of clothing, and that was really pretty much it. Let's see. Yeah, we all had saddlebags. And back then, the saddlebags were leather bags. That was before hard shell saddlebags.
Yeah, yeah.
So you couldn't take too much.
What did gas cost back then?
Gas.
It's like 35 cents a gallon.
Under $1 a gallon.
Yeah.
Under $1 a gallon.
1972 is when I got married the first time. August of 1972.
We were still on our trip then.
Yeah. I probably saw you along the road somewhere because I went out to Utah to get married.
Yeah, we went to Utah. I mean, Eddie, who had I think he called it an idyllic memory. It's not photographic, but it's pretty close to it.
Did somebody have a camera? Didn't you take pictures?
Yeah, I've got some pictures.
Yeah.
But again, back then, there was no. It was all film cameras.
Right.
So a lot of those pictures just haven't survived. I still have a few. And one of them is in Arizona. We all got off our bikes, and it was really funny because we'd been riding all day, and it was the mean temperature was about 100 degrees. And as you know, when you're riding on a bike and it's hot, you don't necessarily notice it because you've got this nice breeze on you all the time.
Right, right.
But it doesn't stop you from getting dehydrated. And as soon as we stopped at a diner and got off our bikes. All of us practically fell down on the ground.
Yeah.
Because that's when the heat really hit us, was when we stopped moving. And we learned real quick, we had to stop frequently in deserts and hydrate ourselves.
Right.
So we went to San Francisco, saw our friend, stayed there for a week, went north from there, stopped for a while in Washington State and picked apples in order to get some money because we were all running out of money by then.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And went into Canada just for a short period of time, or for a couple of days. And then came back to Denver where I had a friend. Stayed there for a day with my friend Jeff. I used to work with the man at Stereo Sound. It was a stereo distribution company, hi-fi distribution.
Uh-huh.
And he had moved out to Denver. And after that, we came straight home. And
you just come across the 80, Dakotas. Yeah.
Yeah. I-80, I guess it is.
Oh, you were in Denver, so you just come across Kansas, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, gosh.
I don't even remember. So, like I said, my friend Dirty Eddie has had this idyllic memory, so he remembered everything. I don't remember squat. But, years after that, I'd say, tell me about our trip. When he could tell us, on the 5th day we did this, on the 23rd day we stayed here.
Hey, can you call Dirty Eddie and tell him to call me, and I'll do a podcast with him. We'll get his perspective on the same trip.
I'll try to if he's still alive, but I have a feeling he's riding that big bike in the sky.
Yeah.
Came to see me and my wife about over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was in really bad shape. I mean, he was overweight to begin with. He had diabetes, and so God bless him. I hope he's still with us.
Yeah. Well.
But a little tidbit about Dirty Eddie. So the three of us, he was, a big man, and he had shoulder length hair. So back in the 60s and the early 70s, people were associated as being freaks or being hippies.
Misfits, yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of times, I can remember specifically when we were driving in the South, one place where we stopped to get gas at a little gas station. There was a bunch of men just sitting in rocking chairs in front. And they kind of looked like rough guys. And Dirty Eddie took off his helmet, and there's his long hair, and I could just see the looks they're giving him. And then I took off my helmet, and then Vanessa takes off her helmet, and immediately the focus is on her because a chick that's driving a bike. Wow, she saved our bacon several times.
Yeah, well, that calmed down the rowdies.
Yeah, we picked up a Hell's Angel along the road once in Colorado, and he met him at a gas station, and he was infatuated with Vanessa. And he had this chopped Harley, and he had a 45 strapped to the bungee cords on the front forks, which was very intimidating, seeing this gun there. And we didn't even want to know why he had it, but he just took a liking to us and started hanging with us.
Yeah. And
we were very uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, I remember him pulling it out while we were driving, seeing a dog that was on the side of the road, and just start, he didn't actually shoot it, but he took it out and just pretended, bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
So, He had a small tank.
Brandishing his weapon, yeah.
Yes, exactly. We brandished him. The next time that we stopped, he had to stop for gas frequently because he had a little teardrop tank on his chopper, whereas we had these, big touring tanks.
Right.
And he stopped and waved for us. We just kept driving. Got up the road, and we pulled off on the side of the road where it went down, this little dirt road, and it was heavily wooded, so you couldn't really see. And we just waited. And about 20 minutes later, we heard him driving by, and we just waited for him to get far ahead of us before we kept going.
So
Pops.
You went about, you said 13,000 miles or so on that trip.
Yes. And Dirty Eddie remembers every part of it. I don't. We went to like I said, we stayed in National Forest campgrounds. We went to every monument just about in this country that you can imagine. It was just the most incredible trip.
Yeah. Well, Mark, sorry to say we run out of time here. I know it goes by so fast. But I wanted to thank you. We wouldn't be able to be doing this very easily or very well if you hadn't generously donated these microphones to us. We really appreciate that.
I'm glad you're putting them to good use.
My brother donated his little Focusrite audio interface, and I've acquired Reaper DAW digital audio workstation. And I keep adding little parts here and there to improve things. So hopefully we'll get it right eventually.
That's awesome. I'm really glad that this blog is taking off, and maybe perhaps you've got some really wealthy listener out there that wants to help fund my next motorcycle.
Yeah.
So I would love to have, but like I said, she who must be obeyed says no.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
well,
I love my wife, and
a
I
lot to be said
her.
For peace and harmony at home.
That's absolutely.
Well,
especially
Mark,
in this time, and so I just want to say one thing. Besides thanking you for what you do, is everybody should stay safe, and we're at the end of the tunnel almost with this pandemic, and nobody should let their guard down now.
Right.
Just because we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, we still have to be vigilant. People need to be safe, and God bless you and everybody else.
Well, thank you, Mark, and once again, I appreciate you calling in and participating in this podcast today. And we'll sign off here and see you down the road somewhere.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed this.
All right. You're welcome. I'll talk to you later then. I'm going to turn the phone off here, and we'll
all right.
We'll catch you later. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. See ya.
Bye-bye.